To mark the 200th anniversary of the founding of the town of Greece, the Greece Historical Society presents a Bicentennial Snapshot. Each week we take a look at a particular aspect of Greece history. This week, as the country marks the beginning of National Women's History Month, we will introduce you to some notable Greece women. Throughout the year, we've told you stories about places, events, and people of the town of Greece. Some of the most elusive to pursue are the stories of Greece women who lived and contributed to the town, state, or country. Before the 20th century, most women usually were written of only when they married or died. First, let us salute all the pioneer women, such as Mehitable Hincher, who helped settle the town and raise their children and help their spouses. Imagine what it was like for Mehitable to be the first European woman to live in the town with no others for miles around. On the banks of the Genesee River, she raised her 8 children and prospered with her husband, as did many other women, whose names and stories are lost to history. There's little documentation for Elizabeth Baker. She was born in 1813 in East Haddam, Middlesex County, Connecticut, the daughter of Josiah Jewett Baker and Alice Fox Baker. She was living in Greece circa 1840, but where or with whom is uncertain. Up until this time, there were only custom tailors in Rochester, but she opened a shop on Front Street in the city selling ready-to-wear children's clothes. Boys' trousers cost 25 cents. She was the very first clothing manufacturer of the city, a city that was on the brink of becoming a center of clothing manufacturing for the country. Circa 1843, Meyer Greentree came to Rochester. He was one of only 5 Jewish people residing in Rochester at the time, and he has been designated by some as the father of the Rochester Jewish community. He first worked for lace dealer Sigmund Rosenberg, also on Front Street. Meyer became acquainted with Elizabeth Baker, and they married in 1844. It was quite unusual for the time for a Jewish man and a Gentile woman to marry. After their marriage and the birth of their first child, Meyer took over the Front Street business and, quote, converted the place to a pants shop and thereby began Rochester's famed men's clothing industry, end quote. Meyer Greentree is rightly called the father of Rochester's clothing industry, and though she is seldom mentioned, one would also have to say that Elizabeth Baker is the mother of Rochester's clothing industry. On November 5, 1872, hoping to generate a legal case to take to the Supreme Court, Susan B. Anthony and 14 other women, including her sister Mary, voted in the presidential election. However, to stave off the possibility that this case could go all the way to the Supreme Court, the women were charged with misdemeanors, not felonies. One of the other women who went with her was Sarah Cole Truesdale. She lived next door to the Anthonys on Madison Street. Sarah Cole was from a pioneer Greece family growing up in Hoosick, that is, South Greece. Her husband, George Truesdale, was from another longtime Greece family. Here is Deborah Cole Myers talking about her ancestor, Sarah Cole Truesdale.
And Mom, I know you never could have known this because we would have heard about it a million times. Your 2 times great Aunt Sarah Cole Truesdale, sister to the original owner of the Cole farmstead, was indicted for voting with Susan B. Anthony. There's her indictment. She's even mentioned in Susan B.'s diary. Finding that out and searching for how in the world did that happen led me to the census entry that shows the Truesdale home was literally next door to the Anthony house on Madison Street.
That's why I wore this shirt.
How did we not know this? My theory is that the family disapproved, so it was not talked about. Fun for us, but probably not so much for her. Family history, especially if you are lucky enough to be living near where so much of it happened, is just a really cool way for people who came before you to become real in your head. The more I find, the better connected I feel to my family and to my town. Some of these people I know or knew, some I'm only beginning to know. But I know where I come from, and to some extent, why. I do not consider myself in any way an expert in genealogy or local history, so if you're just getting started, don't worry about your lack of experience. It all starts with one interesting fact and a question. Thank you.
On May 22, 1873, Sarah appeared before Millard P. Fillmore, son of the 13th President of the United States, who you may recall was from Buffalo. This is a copy of her indictment for the crime of voting for a representative of the United States Congress, 29th Congressional District, quote, without having a legal right to vote in said election district, the said Sarah Truesdale being then and there a person of the female sex, end quote. The court form only accounted for men voting illegally. Notice here that the clerk had to insert an S before he in this sentence. Sarah was released on $400 bail. This is a copy of her recognizance contract. However, the government decided to try only Susan B. Anthony. The case was widely followed in the press all over the country and helped to focus the women's rights movement specifically on suffrage. Let's now consider Greece's most famous suffragist. Jean Brooks Greenleaf was born on October 1, 1831 in Bardenston, Massachusetts. She married Halbert S. Greenleaf, lock manufacturer, Yale and Greenleaf, and later Sargent and Greenleaf here in Rochester, in 1852. In 1867, they moved to Rochester. Halbert Greenleaf, a Democrat, also served 2 terms in the House of Representatives, 1883 to 1885, and 1891 to 1893. He was supportive of his wife's suffrage mission. The Greenleafs lived at 64 North Goodman Street, but also spent the summer months at their home and farm in Greece, what is today all the land around Lakeshore Country Club. At that time, the street was called Fleming Road. Today it is Greenleaf Road. From 1887 through 1890, Jean Brooks Greenleaf was president of the Rochester Political Equality Club. From 1890 through 1896, she was president of the New York State Women's Suffrage Association. During her administration, New York became the best organized state in the Union. For the women of Greece, on September 15, 1892, the Charlotte Political Equality Club was organized at her summer farm and home. Jean's talents were dedicated to the cause in the years immediately before and after the New York State Constitutional Convention in 1894. Women's suffrage was the burning question of the convention. She chaired the Constitutional Amendment campaign as president of the New York Women's Suffrage Association. She worked very closely with Susan B. Anthony, and their headquarters were in the Anthony home. Although their campaign to change the New York State Constitution was not successful, Jean Brooks Greenleaf did live long enough to see women win the vote in New York State in November 1917, but not long enough to actually exercise that right. She died on March 2, 1918, at the age of 86. In 2018, the Greece Historical Society secured a grant from the William C. Pomeroy Foundation and, with the permission of the Lakeshore Country Club, erected a historical marker on the site of her former Greece home and farm. Emma Pollard Greer was a charter member of the Charlotte Political Equality Club. Emma lived all her life in the little white house at the corner of Lake and Pollard Avenues, where she was born on December 12, 1855, the 7th and last child and only daughter of Henry Pollard and Martha Moxon. The Moxon family was one of the earliest settlers in Greece, arriving in 1825. Henry, her father, was born in England and came to Charlotte in 1836. He was the village blacksmith. In 1882, Emma began her 22-year teaching career, first in the Charlotte Grammar School, and then beginning in 1897 as one of 8 faculty members at the high school. At the time of her death at 88 in 1944, Emma was the oldest native of Charlotte. She was the village's historian. She wrote about the town of Greece and Charlotte for both the Democrat and Chronicle and Times Union newspapers. In 1933, she contributed Home Builders of Old Charlotte to Volume 2 of the Centennial History of Rochester, published by the Rochester Historical Society. At the age of 75, she completed the manuscript for her History of Charlotte and gave 2 copies to the Rochester Public Library. It was published in full in 1999. It is due to Emma's diligent history keeping that so much is known about the early history of the village and the town of Greece. One woman she wrote about was Julia Roberts. When they hear the name Julia Roberts, those who are familiar with the history of the Charlotte Blast Furnace, 1868 through 1927, do not think of the beautiful, talented actress. Rather, they think pig iron. Julia Polay Roberts' husband, Henry C. Roberts, took the reins of the iron manufacturing company in 1879 saving it from collapsing. Before Kodak, the blast furnace was the largest employer in Greece. Henry's many business interests required him to take frequent trips, and it was Julia who managed the ironworks plant in his absence. Emmon Pollard Greer wrote of her, "She must have been one of the earliest women iron masters in the United States." After Henry's death in 1885, Julia became head of the company, successfully keeping it one of the most complete and best equipped furnaces in the country. Again quoting Emma Pollard Greer, Mrs. Roberts had an unusual grasp of business for the women of her period. Unfortunately, the financial panic of 1893 and the ensuing depression forced Julia to shut down the operation. It was resurrected and leased to other companies, with Julia retaining some financial rights until 1902. The blast furnace finally went out of business in 1927. After the property was sold to the city of Rochester in 1929, Julia, who had lived at 4752 Lake Avenue near the blast furnace, where the Port of Rochester Marina is today, moved to this house at 4215 Lake Avenue. Julia Roberts died in 1938 at the age of 90 and is buried in Mount Hope Cemetery. Laura Justine Bonesteel, called Jessie, was born in the town of Greece in 1871, the youngest of 8 children and one of 5 girls. Her parents were Joseph F. Bonesteel and Helen Norton. She was stage-struck at an early age and pursued a career as an actress. A printer's era changed her professional name to Jessie Bonesteel. She starred in a number of productions, but her acting talent was limited. She found more success as a manager, producer, and acting coach. After running her own stock companies in Rochester, Syracuse, and Northampton, Massachusetts, she moved to Detroit, where she leased the Garrick Theater and mounted plays there until 1910. In 1923, she went back to New York City to manage the Harlem Opera Theater, but returned to Detroit in 1925, taking over a playhouse she rechristened the Detroit Civic Theater, the first civic theater in America. Quote, "Here she continued to produce plays and encourage young performers. Broadway producers respected her acumen and skill, often asking her to try out new plays for them." End quote. She had a brilliant knack for spotting acting talent, and among her clients were Katharine Cornell, Melvyn Douglas, Frank Morgan, and William Powell. Jessie's greatest achievement as a producer was persuading the family of Louisa May Alcott to sell her the rights to Little Women, and she produced the first stage adaptation of this beloved story, taking it to Broadway and London. Thanks for joining us this week. Next week, we look at the Greece Performing Arts Society. This is Maureen Whalen, inviting you to join us next Tuesday for another Bicentennial Snapshot, presented by the Greece Historical Society.
Want to learn more from the Greece Historical Society and Museum? Then click that subscribe button for more content and hit that bell icon to get notified when there's more Bicentennial Snapshots. You can visit us on the web at GreeceHistoricalSociety.org. You can find us on Facebook at Greece Historical Society, and you can stop in at the Greece Historical Society at 595 Long Pond Road